Okay, lesson 21 is our first lesson here in Module 5, and our first lesson in Module 5 is all about money. Now, I have a feeling that when you first started taking this course, you assumed that you would be learning a lot about money, and it's probably a little surprising that it took us 21 lessons to start talking about money. But nevertheless, here we are, and as you might imagine, money is a pretty important part of economics. So, with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about what money actually is. We'll start first with a basic definition of money, and it is really any asset that people regularly use to buy goods and services from each other. Um, Throughout history, there's actually been a lot of different things that have been used to serve the function of money. Today, of course, we mostly use coins and paper currency to do that job. Societies have used things as far and away as blocks of cheese, pebbles, shells, all sorts of things have been used in the past by societies in some form to serve the purpose of money. But basically, anything that everyone sort of accepts and is used to buy goods and services really would be counted as money. Here's a little history of money. This is not integral to the course, but I think it's interesting just to kind of have an idea about it. Prior to money existing, there was something called bartering. And bartering really was the idea that you would exchange a good and service for another good and service. The problem with bartering is that the consumer always had to find a supplier who wanted something the consumer had. So if you were looking for, I don't know, a chicken and you had a pig, you could trade your pig for the chicken, but the problem was you had to find somebody who had a chicken and, most importantly, who wanted a pig. That wasn't always the easiest thing in the world to do, and it made trade very inefficient. So, because of that, we needed to find something that everyone could agree was valuable and that everyone would want. And that's kind of where money comes from. Some of the earliest money that we know of actually served in the form of of cattle. At the time, everyone sort of thought that cattle were valuable, and so most people would accept cattle as payment for almost any other good. Um, the first recorded use of coin money that we have is around 1000 BC in China, and nearly 2,000 years later, we see the first introduction of paper money also in China. Um, By the way, if you're interested in the history of money, there's a very good summary on PBS that you can Google search, or you can go back to the homepage of the course and click on this link, and it'll take you to an interesting page on the history of money. Again, it's not integral to this course, so we won't spend much time here, but just something to think about the fact that money wasn't always something we took for granted. Um, and now that we have it, we can certainly see its purpose. So, what exactly is its purpose? Why do we need money? Well, there are three main purposes of money. The first is that it serves as what's called a medium of exchange. In other words, what it does is it's a universally accepted by suppliers in exchange for goods and services. And again, there have been a number of things in history that have been served as money, but essentially, as long as it allows consumers to buy goods from suppliers without having to worry about whether the supplier wants the thing they have, it works as money. Money's purpose is that everyone wants it. So in reality, you shouldn't ever have to worry about who you're purchasing from as long as they have the good you want. You don't have to worry about whether they want your good. They do want your good. They want your money. And that works well. So it's a medium of exchange. Its second purpose is as what we call a unit of account. And really, what that is it's a common value that is agreed upon to measure something's worth. If I said to you that a Picasso painting and a diamond ring were worth the same amount, how exactly do we measure that? What standard could we use to say that these two things have equal worth? What we want is some common idea that everyone agrees on, that a certain amount of value means a certain thing. Money, therefore, serves as a common standard that we can all agree on. If we say now that a Picasso is worth $1 million and a diamond ring is worth $1 million, we now understand how those two things are equally valuable. The last purpose of money is as a store of value. And by that we mean that it keeps value earned in the present for future use. If money didn't store value, then what would happen is every time somebody went to work, it would be expected that the value of their work, they would have to reap those rewards from that work immediately. If we were paid, for example, in food, that would be an example of that kind of system. The problem with that is that eventually you're not going to be able to work, or maybe you have one particularly expensive thing that you want to save for some time, but you can't do all at once. If the value of what you did just disappeared into thin air after you did it, then you could never save for the future. You could never prepare for retirement. You could never save up for a one big vacation. But what money does for us is it says, okay, you worked hard when you were 25 years old, and you worked so hard that some of that money, some of that earning, some of that value, we're gonna keep, and you're going to be able to use whenever you want later on. Well, the only way you could do that is if you could store that in something. That's what money does for us. Money allows us to store that value somewhere. Okay, there's also important features of money. In order for money to really work properly, there's a number of things that it needs to do. It needs to be portable. It needs to be able to be moved around easily. It needs to be durable. We have to be able to beat it up pretty much because it's going to exchange hands. It's going to move around a lot. So pieces of glass probably wouldn't work too well as money. It has to be pretty tough. It has to be divisible. If we just had chunks of lead as money, that wouldn't work so well because every single time we wanted to buy something small, we'd have to then either buy lots of that small thing to make up one big amount or somehow split that big chunk of lead into little pieces. It wouldn't work very well. So you want money to be easily divisible into smaller denominations. And of course, in our case, we divide with smaller currencies and eventually into coins. You want everyone to accept that it's valuable. And maybe most importantly, it has to be in limited supply. It's one of the reasons that sand wouldn't work very well as money because ultimately anybody who needed money could just run down to the beach and get a handful of sand. And at that point, no one would consider it valuable. So it needs to be in a certain limited supply. And that's actually going to be a very important feature of this unit. By the way, I laugh because cheese was actually at one point considered a possibility for money, and you can imagine that it's probably not very durable. Even if everyone did really enjoy cheese, it wouldn't work too well as money. Neither would seashells, as I kind of put here. Okay, types of money. There are two types of money that we've looked at throughout history, and we're going to look at here in this class. The first is what's called commodity money. And commodity money is money that represents something else with intrinsic value. So in this case, essentially the money itself doesn't have any value, but it represents something that does. And of course, probably one of the most common examples of that is the gold standard. For many, many years, the money that was in Americans' pockets really was just standing in place of a bunch of gold that the United States government had stored. Everybody agreed that gold was valuable, and but that gold really was just too heavy, frankly, to move around all the time, and not very secure to do that. So we created this paper and these coins to represent that gold. Even cigarettes in prison was a good example of commodity money, of where something that was being exchanged was actually the thing actually had value. What we use today, and this is actually something that many people don't realize, what we use today is something called fiat money. And fiat money is money that derives its value from government decree, meaning that it has no intrinsic value by itself. The only value it has is what the government says. In fact, here's a picture. You can see that it says right on this dollar bill, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. That statement is what gives the money that we carry around in our pockets value. Just as a side note, my second bullet point there, governments must be stable and have legitimacy for the system to work, because the only thing giving the money the value is the fact that the government is credible, that people really can trust the government that's issuing that currency, that it has credibility. We're going to see in this course, and if you watch current events, many situations where governments didn't have credibility and therefore their currency wasn't credible. The United States dollar is still considered the world standard for money, and that's because generally speaking, the United States government is considered the most stable and the most trusted uh, source of wealth in the world. And therefore, the US dollar is very credible. So please note that today we run on a fiat system of money, not a commodity system of money as we once did. And we'll talk a little bit later on about why we made the change, but fiat money is where we are today. And lastly, we want to talk about how we measure our money, and this is going to be very important for this unit going forward. The first measure, or the first category of money, we call M1. And M1 is very simple. Okay, it's essentially made up of a few things. The first of which is currency, that stuff that we carry around in our pockets, paper bills and coins used by the public. And as of the recording of this video, that was $1.23 trillion of that stuff is floating around the economy. That's actually quite a bit, by the way, by historical standards. And we'll get into why later, why there is so much at this moment floating around. But the first thing that's included in M1 is currency. The other thing that's included in M1 are what are called demand deposits. And demand deposits are any source of money that can be instantly accessed through the use of a check or card. And now actually even in some cases electronic. Demand deposits, the key to both of these things, guys, whether it's currency or demand deposits, the key to being an M1 is that you can make the transaction with this money instantly. There's no waiting period, there's no time off whatsoever. The money is there when you need it, whenever you need it. And again, whether that's through a debit card, or whether that's through actually having the cash in your pocket, or whether that's through writing a check, they all count as M1. And the distinction is going to be very important later on. The second category of money that we use is called M2. Now, M2 first includes all of M1. That's not all that important, but just so you know, it includes all of M1 technically. It also includes, and this is probably the most important one, which is why I highlighted it, it includes savings accounts. Now, savings accounts are not included in M1 because though they are relatively easy to access, all you really have to do is go to the bank with your savings account book. You can't use it instantly. You can't actually walk into a store and generally access money from a savings account. That's the point of a savings account. So generally speaking, savings accounts are not considered M1. They're considered M2. And again, the distinction between M1 and M2 is going to become very important. For right now, we just need to make sure we know what's in M1 and what's in M2. And savings accounts are going to be the most common example of M2 that we'll see. There are a few others, by the way, but nothing that's going to be too important. The last phrase I want to put in here is the idea of liquidity. And again, liquidity is the extent to which money can be easily accessed. What we're going to begin to say is that M1 is very liquid, has a high degree of liquidity. The truth is, so does M2, but not as much as M1. M1 is completely, if you will, liquid and be able to be accessed at any moment, at any time. Okay, that concludes our first lesson in this module.